So I want to make a video that supplements our first 4 weeks of class. So I'm going to go through this text here, and I'm just going to briefly mention some things that are indicated in this text. First of all, we've been doing what's called event-driven programming. That's what we've been doing all along in our class. It says a Windows program is quite different from before, when they used to have what are called MS-DOS programs. A DOS program follows a relatively strict path from the beginning to the end. So you would just have a program. You didn't have any buttons or anything like that. Not much way for the user to interact at all with the program. This was programming a long time ago. Although this does not necessarily limit the functionality of the program, it does limit the road the user has to take to get to it. So a DOS program is like walking down a hallway. To get to the end, you have to walk down the entire hallway, passing any obstacles that you may encounter. A DOS program would only let you open certain doors along your stroll. Windows, on the other hand, opened up the world of event-driven programming. Events in this context include clicking a button, resizing a window, changing an entry in a text box. The code that you write responds to these events. That's what we've been doing. In terms of the hallway analogy in a Windows program, to get to the end of the hall, you just click at the end of the hall. The hallway itself can be ignored. If you get to the end and realize that that is not where you wanted to go, you just set off for a new destination. Okay? So they're saying that there's a big difference between what we're doing and the old way of programming. Okay, let's go on. Another big advantage in a Windows program is the abstraction of the hardware, which means that that Windows takes care of communicating with the hardware for you. You don't need to know the inner workings of every laser printer on the market just to create output, right? So this is a big advantage from, say, 20 years ago. You do not need to study the schematics for graphics cards to write your own game. So this is called abstraction of the hardware. So they write sort of, we have, like a word maybe, or 2 words or 3 words that stand for the hardware and stand for the different functions the hardware can do. We don't have to go in deeply into the workings of the hardware. Windows wraps up this functionality by providing generic routines that communicate. Routines mean small programs that communicate with drivers written by hardware manufacturers. This is probably the main reason why Windows has been so successful. The generic routines are referred to as the Windows Application Programming Interface. So they provide you with these kind of simple names of the things and maybe some actions that they can do, but it's much simpler than all the details underneath. And that's basically what an application programming interface is. It's an interface that to the programmer, meaning you're the programmer in this case, that is much easier to use in order to get things done on the inside. And most of the classes in .NET framework take care of communicating with those APIs. So the .NET framework, which we're doing, Microsoft Visual Basic .NET, and that basically when they say framework, they just mean a bunch of libraries or a bunch of extra code that that's already been written that we're allowed to use, or that we can access because we're using the .NET framework. So it means we have access to those libraries of code, so we don't have to write the code ourselves. Before Visual Basic 1.0, we're way past 1.0 now, we're like 6.0 and beyond that actually, was introduced in the world in 1991, developers had to be well versed in C and C+ programming, as well as the building blocks of the Windows system itself, the Windows API. This complexity meant that only dedicated and properly trained individuals were capable of turning out software that would run on Windows. Visual Basic changed all that, and it has been estimated that there are now as many lines of production code written in Visual Basic as in any other language. Visual Basic, so in other words, Visual Basic is very popular. A lot of people are using it. Visual Basic changed the face of Windows programming by removing the complex burden of writing code for the user interface. Right? That's what we've said many times, that we don't have to write the code to create our forms. Forms are already created for us, and we just have to put in the code for like a button, what we want the button to do. By allowing programmers to draw their own UI user interface, that's what we do, we create a form, we're drawing our own user interface, it freed them to concentrate on the business problems they were trying to solve. It's much easier. Now we can write problems to do different things in business or whatever we want. When the UI is drawn, the programmer can then add code to react to events. Visual Basic has also been extensible from the very beginning. Third-party vendors quickly saw the market for reusable modules to aid developers. These modules, or controls, were originally referred to as VBXs, named after their file extension. Prior to Visual Basic 5.0, if you did not like the way a button behaved, you could either buy or create your own. But those controls had to be written in C or C++. Database access utilities were some of the first controls available. Version 5 of Visual Basic introduced the concept of ActiveX, which enabled developers to create their own ActiveX controls. When Microsoft introduced Visual Basic 3.0, the programming world changed significantly. Now you could build database applications directly accessible to users, so-called front-end applications, completely with Visual Basic. There was no need to rely on third-party controls. Microsoft accomplished this task with the introduction of Data Access Objects, DAO, which enabled programmers to manipulate data with the same ease as manipulating their user interface. Okay, let's go on to here. With the release of Visual Basic.net in February 2002, most of the restrictions that used to exist were obliterated. In the past, Visual Basic was criticized and maligned as a toy language because it did not provide all of the features of more sophisticated languages such as C++ and Java. Microsoft removed these restrictions with Visual Basic.net, which was rapidly adopted as a very powerful development tool. This trend has continued with the release of Visual Basic 2003, 2005, 2010. Each new release of Visual Basic.net offers many new programming features, improvements, trends, making it a great choice for programmers of all levels. So that means you. Now remember, we said that you don't need Visual Basic 2010 to write applications using this language. The capability to run Visual Basic.net code is included with the .NET framework. You could write all of your Visual Basic.net code using a text editor such as Notepad. Then he kind of makes a joke. You could also hammer nails using your shoe as a hammer, but that slick pneumatic nailer sitting there is a lot more efficient. So of course we have better tools than our shoe, and of course we have better tools than Notepad. In the same way, by far the easier way to write Visual Basic.net code is using Visual Studio 2010 IDE. So remember, or IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. It's just a fancy word for meaning it has lots of tools. They're all integrated into one environment, into one location for developing. So integrated development environment. This is what you so that's what Visual Basic that's what Visual Studio is. So they say an IDE is a way of bringing together a suite of tools that make developing software a lot easier. Fire up Visual Studio 2010, see what you've got. If you've used the default installation, go to your Windows Start menu. Okay, so you know about this, and you know about this, and these things. Okay. So if you want to, you can stop the video and read these, and Then you know about these. You can also just check this diagram here about the toolbars. We don't have time to go through all of them, but you might want to know what they are. And here's creating a simple application, which we've done many times. Talked about the toolbox. Okay, so what is this modified Hungarian notation? Now, I'm not sure we did it in our code, but you may have noticed that the names given to the controls look a little funny. They're talking about something like this. So you'll have a name like this. And this is standard, but we're not doing it in our course, but you should become familiar with it. And you'll have another one like this. So let's just read this. After drawing a control on the form, you should at least configure its name and the text that it will display. So at least you want to configure, or they're suggesting that you should configure the name. We haven't really done that. We've just left the default name. You will see that the properties window to the right of the designer has changed to label 1, right? Telling you that you are currently examining the property for the label. In the properties window, set your new label's text property to enter your name. So they're just saying something we've done many times, which is set the text property of label 1. Note that after you press enter or click another property, the label on the form has automatically resized and fit the text in the text. Okay. Now set the name property to this. So they're saying that instead of using what originally was called label 1, they're saying so now they're saying that instead of what we called it, we just left it as label 1, we should change it to this kind of name. So we'll call it label 1. Is that label 1? Or that's label name. Okay? And here's another example. Directly beneath the label, you want to add a text box so that you can enter a name. So they're talking about this label and then this text box. You're going to repeat the procedure you followed for adding the label, but this time make sure that you select the text box control. So of course you want to use a text box control instead of a label from the toolbar. After you have dragged and dropped it, the control into the appropriate position, use the properties window, so change its property, to set its name property to text name. Okay, so this is called Hungarian notation, and this is common and a good idea. Maybe we'll start doing it, but maybe we won't. But it's a good idea. Let's go back to, so here's another example. So set its name to button OK. So it's an OK button, but don't just leave it. Normally we would just leave it as button 1 or button 2 or something like that. This might be a better name than button 1, button 2. Call it BTN and then OK, because it's an OK button, or it's supposed to. So this is called modified Hungarian notation. You may have noticed that the names given to the controls look a little bit funny. Each is prefixed with a shorthand identifier like BTN or like LBL, describing the type of control it is. This makes it much easier to understand what type of control you are working with as you look through the code. Now, just leaving it with the default names is also easy to understand what kind of control it is. But this is a standard way of doing things. For example, say you had a control called simply name without a prefix of label or LBL or TXT. You would not know whether you were working with a text box that accepted a name or with a label that displayed a name. Imagine if in the previous you had named your label name 1 and your text box name 2, then you wouldn't have any idea which was which, right? You'd get confused. So they're saying prefix it with something like LBL or TXT. Okay, and that's called Hungarian notation. Actually, they call it modified Hungarian notation. Okay, and these are the prefaces that are typically used. So button BTN, combo box CBO, checkbox CHK, label LBL, list box LST, main menu MNU, radio button RDB, picture box PIC, and text box TXT. So this one is radio button. We'll see that a little later here. The code editor, we've talked about that. This is called the code editor. This is where we edit the code. We've done that many times. And they talk about how to do that, how to do this. Okay. Using the help system, that's always good to know about. So you can go through here and get lots of good help references. So what have we just talked about? We talked about what's meant by the IDE. That's just Visual Studio. You know about adding controls, setting the properties of your controls. We've certainly done that. And adding code to your form in the code window. We've done all of that. Okay, in the next video we'll talk about the Microsoft.NET framework and what it is, and why Microsoft dared to spend billions on a single development project.